Most people walked away from Episode 2 asking one question. What happened to the USS Griffin? Was it haunted? Was there some unknown life form on board? Did the crew lose their minds? Those are good questions. They're also the exact questions the episode wants us to ask. And that's why I think almost everyone missed the biggest clue. Because after watching the episode twice, I stopped thinking about what happened aboard the Griffin. I started thinking about why the story keeps pushing us toward that question in the first place. The more I looked at it, the more convinced I became that the Griffin isn't the lie. The explanation surrounding it is. I don't think Episode 2 is trying to hide a monster. I think it's hiding responsibility. That's a very different mystery. And if that's true, then we've all been looking in the wrong direction. There's one detail that immediately stood out to me. When Starfleet encounters something it doesn't understand, the franchise usually wants us to investigate it alongside the crew. That's part of what makes Star Trek so enjoyable. The mystery unfolds. The evidence builds. Eventually, the crew pieces together an answer. Episode 2 doesn't really do that. Instead, it gives us fragments, enough to keep us asking questions, but never enough to make the official explanation feel complete. Normally, I'd chalk that up to the writers setting up a future episode. But this didn't feel like an unfinished mystery. It felt like a controlled one, almost as if every answer we receive has been carefully chosen to stop us from asking a different question. That isn't the same thing. And that's where this theory began for me. Think about how everyone talks about the Griffin. Almost every conversation centers on what happened aboard the ship. Very few people stop to ask something much simpler. Why don't we already know? The Griffin wasn't some anonymous civilian vessel drifting through unexplored space. It was a Constitution-class starship, one of Starfleet's most important ships. If something catastrophic happened to a vessel like that, you'd expect investigations, reports, recovery efforts, questions from Starfleet Command. Instead, the Griffin feels strangely forgotten. That doesn't sit right with me. Ships don't simply disappear from history unless somebody allows them to. And that brings me to what I think is the biggest lie in Episode 2. The episode wants us to believe the mystery begins when the Enterprise finds the Griffin. I don't think it does. I think the mystery begins years earlier, the moment the Griffin disappeared. Because from that point forward, every missing report, every unanswered question, and every gap in the story becomes part of the mystery too. There's another detail that kept bothering me. The Enterprise crew spends much of the episode reacting to the ship, reacting to strange events, reacting to discoveries. But who is actually driving the investigation? No one. They're responding to clues someone else left behind. That's an important difference. It means the Enterprise isn't uncovering a fresh mystery. They're walking into one that has already been shaped. Someone has already decided what evidence remains. Someone has already decided what information disappeared. The crew can only investigate what's left. That immediately limits what they're able to discover. And I don't think that's accidental. The more I thought about it, the less convinced I became that the Griffin itself is the story. The Griffin is evidence. Evidence always points somewhere. The real question is, where? One possibility is that Starfleet simply never found the ship. That sounds reasonable at first. Space is unimaginably large. Ships disappear. Searches fail. But this is where the timeline starts becoming interesting. The Griffin wasn't lost yesterday. Enough time has passed that people have accepted its disappearance as history. Think about that for a second. One of Starfleet's flagship-class vessels disappears, and somehow the mystery fades into the background. Would that really happen? I'm not convinced. Starfleet has never treated its ships as disposable, especially ships carrying hundreds of officers. Even if recovery proved impossible, you'd still expect the Griffin to become one of the Federation's greatest unsolved cases. Instead, it almost feels like people stopped looking. That's the part one can't ignore. Because giving up isn't the same as failing. Someone decides when an investigation ends. Someone decides when a file is closed. Someone decides which questions no longer need answers. Episode 2 never tells us who made those decisions. And maybe that's exactly the point. Now, I'm not saying Starfleet covered anything up. The episode doesn't give us evidence to make that claim. But it does leave room to wonder whether the official story is the complete story. Those are very different ideas. Sometimes information disappears because no one can find it. Other times, information disappears because people stop asking for it. There's another moment that becomes much more interesting once you look at the episode this way. Watch how quickly everyone accepts the Griffin as a mystery that may never have a satisfying explanation. That acceptance comes surprisingly fast. Almost too fast. Star Trek usually celebrates curiosity. The Enterprise crew rarely settles for uncertainty. They keep digging until they find the truth. Here, there's a strange feeling that the mystery itself is almost enough, as though asking the question matters more than answering it. That stood out to me, because unresolved mysteries often protect something. Sometimes they're protecting fear. Sometimes they're protecting hope. Sometimes they're protecting people. And that's why I keep coming back to one possibility. What if the Griffin wasn't forgotten because no one knew what happened? What if it was forgotten because someone decided the truth would create even bigger problems? Notice, I'm not saying that's what happened. The episode doesn't confirm it, but it quietly leaves that door open. And once that possibility exists, every scene starts feeling a little different. You're no longer watching the Enterprise solve a mystery. You're watching them uncover pieces of a story that may have been incomplete long before they ever arrived. That's a much more interesting mystery than asking whether the Griffin was haunted, because haunted ships are temporary. Hidden truths have consequences that can last for decades. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think Episode 2 is asking us to notice something far more unsettling than whatever happened aboard the Griffin. It's asking us to notice how easily an official version of history can become the only version people remember. And if that's the real lie, then the Griffin isn't the mystery at all. It's the proof that someone, somewhere, was willing to let the truth disappear. There's another reason I think the Griffin is only part of the story. Look closely at how the episode is structured. Normally, when Strange New Worlds introduces a mystery, each new discovery brings the crew closer to an answer. Episode 2 doesn't really work that way. The more information we get, the less certain everyone becomes. That's unusual. Instead of narrowing the possibilities, the episode keeps widening them. And I don't think that's because the writers couldn't decide on an explanation. I think it's because certainty was never the goal. Doubt was. The Griffin becomes a perfect way to test that idea. Every person who encounters the ship walks away with a slightly different understanding of what happened. Some see tragedy. Some see fear. Some see something they can't explain. The facts never completely settle into one clear story. That's important, because history becomes very easy to reshape when certainty disappears. Once people stop agreeing on what happened, someone else gets to define the official version. That may be the biggest clue in the entire episode. The lie isn't necessarily a false statement. Sometimes the biggest lie is allowing uncertainty to replace truth. The longer uncertainty survives, the easier it becomes for people to accept whatever explanation they're eventually given. That's something Star Trek has explored before, not through monsters or strange anomalies, but through institutions. Even in the Federation, information can be incomplete. Reports can be classified. Entire missions can disappear into archives that very few people ever see. That doesn't automatically mean there's a conspiracy, but it does mean the truth isn't always available to everyone. Episode 2 quietly reminds us of that. Then there's Captain Pike. One thing I appreciate about Pike is that he rarely jumps to conclusions. He listens, he observes, he weighs different possibilities before making a decision. That's exactly why his role in this episode matters. Notice that Pike never behaves like someone who's completely convinced by the obvious explanation. He's careful, measured, almost as if he understands that solving a mystery isn't the same as understanding it. There's a subtle difference there. Finding evidence tells you what happened. Understanding a mystery means asking why those events unfolded the way they did. Episode 2 spends much more time encouraging that second question. And that's where I think the writers are being incredibly clever. Most viewers are trying to identify the cause. The episode seems more interested in showing us the consequences. The Griffin isn't terrifying because of what happened aboard it. It's terrifying because no one can confidently explain it. That uncertainty spreads. It changes how people think, how they react, how they remember. That's exactly how legends are born. Not from complete stories, but from incomplete ones. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the Griffin almost functions like a warning. Not a warning about haunted ships. A warning about accepting easy explanations when the evidence doesn't quite fit. Star Trek has always encouraged curiosity. Question assumptions. Test conclusions. Keep looking. Episode 2 follows that tradition in a quieter way. It never forces one answer on the audience. Instead, it asks whether we're satisfied too quickly. And honestly, I don't think we should be, because there are still too many missing pieces. Too many unanswered questions. Too many moments where the episode seems deliberately comfortable with uncertainty. That makes me think the Griffin isn't meant to be solved in a single episode. Not because the writers are saving a sequel, because the Griffin represents something larger than itself. It's an example of how history slowly transforms into mythology. Every year that passes without clear answers, the truth becomes harder to recover. Rumors replace facts. Assumptions replace evidence. Eventually, people stop searching altogether. That's the real danger. Not whatever happened on the Griffin. The willingness to stop asking questions. And that's why I think the title of this theory fits so well. Everyone missed the biggest lie in episode 2. The lie isn't that the Griffin was haunted. The lie isn't that Starfleet deliberately deceived everyone. The episode never proves either of those things. The real lie is the idea that the mystery begins with the Griffin itself. I don't think it does. The mystery began the moment the truth became incomplete. Everything we've watched since then has simply been people trying to rebuild a story from missing pieces. That's a much more interesting mystery, because it doesn't end when the credits roll. It keeps growing. Every unanswered question becomes another missing piece. Every missing piece creates another theory. And that's exactly what Strange New Worlds wants us to do. Not blindly accept the first explanation that sounds reasonable, but keep looking beyond it. Because if episode 2 has shown us anything, it's that the most dangerous secrets in Star Trek aren't always hidden behind locked doors. Sometimes they're hidden inside the stories everyone thinks they already understand.